and therefore can pass between the interstices of the sand. Thus we go on with various elements. Many things can be in the same place, fulfilling their own laws, as long as they are themselves of different qualities. There will be no conflict between them. Consequently, in nature, conflict is nearly always a thing resisting its own laws, whatever they may be. And such resistance is not common to be found in space itself. Space is forever moving with the magnificent sense of cooperation with things, rather than with a sense of competition. Assuming then now that we have a universe with all its laws, that we have recognized the possibility, as the ancients held, that this universe was eternal, that its laws were eternal, that its substances and essences were eternal, and its objectives are eternal. We are still now concerned to some degree with the relationship of the universe as consciousness to the universe as substance. Actually, substance and consciousness themselves are identical, but they represent two conditions of one eternal reality, or one eternal fact. These conditions are bridged by what the Gnosis calls emanations. The conditions of consciousness become more and more restricted, resulting in a descent of value. The elements of substance become more and more refined or attenuated or sublimated, causing an ascent of substance. And where consciousness descending and matter ascending finally meet, we have the point of junction, or the point of control, wherein consciousness regains its positive relationship to matter or substance. Let's try to understand a little more on this particular theme. Consciousness, as we use the term today, must exist in space, or man could not be a conscious creature. The thought processes that we use must also exist, potentially at least, in every atom of space, or man could not have them. Thus we are dealing with a universe potentially conscious, potentially intelligent, and potentially endowed with all feelings, emotions, and sensory perceptions. These must be in the seed of things, even if they have not grown. Man is by no means the only product of space, nor is he the noblest. Therefore, there is every reason to assume that long before his advent, other forms of life had achieved consciousness, had achieved intelligence, and had released emotional and psychic content. This would mean, then, that there have to be powers superior to man, possessing intelligence. What are these powers? Some of the scriptural writers, particularly St. Paul, refers to the hierarchs, the angels, archangels, thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. These were regarded as great waves of superior life that had passed beyond our consciousness, but which belong to the same vast unfoldment of which we are a part. Science would not have had much luck trying to identify the archangelic hosts, but science is confronted with organisms or structures superior to man, which it has not been willing as yet to give much attention to in terms of consciousness. The most normal and immediate of these structures is a planet. Is a planet to be regarded as the production of an evolutionary process. We have our physical, astronomical interpretation of how planets come into being. But we are no more talking about planets in this respect than we are talking about men when we discuss the various developments of the fetus and the embryo. We are talking only about bodies. Science can explain bodies, but science is still having a very bad time trying to explain man as something separate from or superior to body. Many scientists have not yet made up their minds that man is separable from body. But science will admit that when the proper kind of a body is generated, something that passes for intelligence in humanity is also revealed or released. Perhaps we are a little optimistic as to the measure of this intelligence, but something capable of learning to read and write is produced, even though it may never be taught to read and write. That's another problem. Science, assuming, therefore, that a fortunate combination of processes produces a human body in which intelligence can develop, is in the presence of other fortunate combinations of elements from which planets have been produced. Now, planets cannot hardly be regarded merely as persons in the term that we use. But we have no reason or right to assume that intelligence depends utterly upon a peculiar type of structure which we denominate the genus Homo sapiens. There could be other kinds of creatures which could have intelligence as great as our own or even greater. If the intelligence of these other creatures was identical with our own, we would be able to interpret it. We would recognize it. And seeing something that thought the same way we did, we would say, here is another magnificent example of erudition. But if this other creature had a mentation process too low for us to estimate, we could not know it. Or if it was too high and went beyond the trivia with which we make up our intellectual lives, we would have also no way of recognizing it. If planets have intelligence, it is obvious their intelligence is not the same as that of man. Also, it is quite possible that many other creatures have intelligence. And the fact that these creatures are not favorably regarded by man as being subject to intellectual advancement does not change the possibility. For mentality can exist on different levels and planes. And an intelligence, for example, that is completely introverted, turned entirely within, might become a very great and luminous being. But man would have no way of estimating this unless the intelligence was released or reflected in common action which man understands. That is why Burbank was of the opinion that we underestimated plants, inasmuch as many of them have more sensory perceptions than man has. But their area of mentation is different, and that to us, which is different, is usually non-existent. Let us assume, then, that the intelligence of a planet is not the same as ours. That being a much vaster and more ancient organism, and far more complex in its structure, we might assume that the planet was more highly evolved than an individual, and that therefore it might properly be appointed as the throne of a deity, as it was in Greece and Egypt, and even the star angels of the ancient Jews. If we want to say that a planet is more highly evolved, then all we are actually requiring to demonstrate this is a proof that the planet possesses superior intelligence. This proof is more or less forthcoming at any time we look for it. Actually, each planet has sustained its own evolutionary procedures. On each planet, forms of life develop. The lives of these developing species may extend into countless ages. Most recent investigation indicates that man has been here as a recognized species for at least 15 million years. Therefore, the Earth produces from itself. Not only does it produce forms of life from itself, but it also radiates from its own nature electrical and magnetic fields, which can likewise be estimated. And certain phases of electrical and magnetic activity can be determined or noted through the aurora borealis and the aurora australatus. These energy fields of the planet can only exist if the planet is alive. Nor can these energy fields be assumed to merely be an essence permeating the planet. For essences permeating the planet do not take upon themselves organized forms any more than essences permeating the human body, but in no way directly associated with it, could produce the specialized structure which we have in man. These essences have to be tied to a pattern, and they have to be evolving through a pattern in order to be effective or knowable or recognizable by us. I think then we must assume, and will ultimately prove to scientific satisfaction, that planets are beings, that they are, as Plato might have called them, huge animals crawling in space. Perhaps he was not as flattering as he should have been, because these are not just simply animals, they are godlings, if godlings can be seen. They represent tremendous centers of activity, mental and physical. Mental activity because the life on each planet is as methodically laid out as in space. Thus we must assume that a planet is a consciously obeying organism, that it is fulfilling law, that law is being released through it. Perhaps we would rather like to think of the planet as an unconscious obeying element or pattern, that like a flower, it is merely fulfilling its natural destiny. But we have no way of knowing that the flower does not have an intelligence. It is only that it does not parallel or come within the experience of our minds. Investigations in India have shown that plants can experience fear even in physical terms. Therefore, our idealist ancestors, who are not desperately trying to kill everything in space as the basis of scientific exactitude, were quite willing to assume that planets were beings. That these beings, like the human body, sustained an infinite diversity of life, permeating them and upon their surface. That these forms of life are all provided for by energies released from the earth, and that this balance of energy is maintained by bringing the living things upon a planet into an harmonious balance between earth energy and solar energy. That in the development of creatures, therefore, the great Mother Earth was a